People will freak out when food prices triple in the dark winter ahead. Upon hearing this, Americans will be furious. Industry experts warn that your grocery bill will increase considerably this winter after the highest food costs in almost 40 years last year. The coming round of rising will be extremely severe. Rising costs of 50, 60, or even 70% are no longer a threat. They are already a reality for millions of American households. According to a survey conducted by the Wood Johnson Foundation and published recently, more than 1 in 5 American families claim poverty due to rising costs. This year, our domestic food supply suffered severely, and farmers are upset about the situation, claiming that things surely aren't going to be okay. CEOs of supermarkets and restaurant chains are encouraging the public to stock up on essentials now, since things will only become more complex over time. In other words, it's time to plan for a chilly, dark winter as hardworking people get tired of the high living expenses, and some may lose their minds due to the excessive rise in food inflation. Another big shock at the grocery shop is coming as winter approaches. According to ReadyWise, a firm that sells emergency supplies, tens of millions of Americans already suffer from high prices. They shouldn't overlook warnings about food insecurity because these disturbing patterns are likely to stay and get worse in 2023. People are very disturbed by what they see when they visit the supermarket. According to a recent New York Times report, consumers report 50 to 70% price increases at their local supermarkets. A 5-pack of short ribs at her super local Walmart is now about 70% more expensive than a year ago, rising from about $60 to $200 yet last month, according to Susan Pollock, a property manager from Marina Del Rey, California. "We do not have short ribs again," I informed my husband, she said. "The sad fact is that the effect of more than 24 months of delays on our food supply chain and domestic agriculture is likely to be seen in the following price spikes. In plain English, get ready for another financial hit." The nation's top farmers, grocery store CEOs, insiders, and restaurants are all warning about the rising prices this winter. Hormel Foods, a food company and manufacturer, provided an even more severe prediction. This winter, prices at the supermarket will rise with the rise in corn and soybean meal prices for pet food, which increased nearly 125% and 40% respectively. We are all in serious trouble if our local stores' prices for meat, grain-based foods, and grains reflect even a small portion of these increases. According to Mark Hamrick, a senior economist at Bankrate.com, food is not necessary at the most basic level. That is the challenging aspect of the circumstances. Consumers expect that rising costs will continue in the future. Thus, it is wise for people to continue being careful with their household finances, he said. Belt-tightening time has been upon us for a while, according to Hamrick. Unfortunately, the mess is already created. No matter what measures the government takes, the harm to our food supply chain cannot heal quickly. As a result, life will become more difficult for everyone and challenging for millions of low-income families worldwide. Rising global food prices for producers are in the spotlight, raising public concern. The most recent data show a global reduction in the rise of consumer food prices, but as we will discuss below, it can change in the months ahead. It will considerably raise the high costs consumers in many countries already suffered last year. There will likely be significant gaps between countries if prices eventually rise again. From various circumstances, likely, consumers in developing and emerging countries living with the effects of the crisis would suffer the most severely. Developing nations and emerging markets are more vulnerable to the shocks in food costs. Consumers' food inflation peaked in April 2020, although prices of primary products, including food and energy, were also rapidly decreasing as demand for primary food items was disrupted. Disruptions in the food supply, a shift from food services, like having a meal out, to retail food stores and consumer putting away, coupled with a sharp appreciation of the US dollar, drove consumer food pricing in many countries. However, different consumer food prices had normalized by the summer of 2020, reducing consumer food prices in many nations. So, even while consuming food prices, i.e., the price you pay at the grocery store, may have increased dramatically, it would be excessive to claim they are rising rapidly in years. Also, they are not causing prices, but they might in the future, specifically in 2022. In contrast, producer prices have recently increased dramatically. However, it takes between 6 to 12 months for changes in consumer prices to be realized in consumer prices. Additionally, only about 20% of producer price increases are passed on to customers. It is because the price of consumer food covers the cost of delivering basic food supplies, processing, marketing, and packaging food, and final delivery costs like travel costs. An increase in consumers' food prices is likely to resume in the remaining months of 2021 and 2022. The recent sharp rise in international food prices has already started to significantly affect domestic consumer prices as retailers pass on the increases to customers, since they cannot absorb the higher costs. However, it's likely to come as food supply prices are estimated to rise nearly 25% from 2020 to 2021 until normalizing. Thus, a rise in consumer food price inflation of around 3.2 percentage points and 1.75 percentage points, respectively, on average in 2021 and 2022 would result from the move of 20%, 13% in the initial year and 7% in the second. The increasing fare may add a percentage point to the 2021 global consumer food inflation. However, the effects can vary depending on the nation. Because of their increased dependencies on imported food, consumers in emerging markets may see even more significant rises, e.g., countries in sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and North Africa. The producer price to consumer price run for developing markets is usually higher. Further food inflation could seriously affect reduced nations now suffering from the pandemic. As consumers in developing markets and reduced nations spend a large amount of their money on food, these nations are also more vulnerable to shocks in food prices. An additional risk factor for emerging markets and developing economies is the currency's loss against the dollar, which can be brought on by falling export and tourist income and net capital flows. The cost to import food has increased in nations with effects on finances because most food products are sold in US dollars. Rising food prices and low incomes now have the potential to undo some of the work made over the 20 years towards reducing inequality worldwide. The World Bank projects that in addition to what was predicted before the epidemic, an extra 75 million to 95 million people will live in poverty in 2022 due to the virus, high inflation, and rising tensions. And according to the yearly Global Hunger Index, malnutrition and poverty could be caused by a lack of food supply in 60 nations, up from 47 before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Unfortunately, rising food prices coincide with economies that have recently recovered from a pandemic that lasted for 2 years. As the economy slowed, numerous governments stepped in to help citizens and companies. As a result, average debt and deficit levels have increased globally. However, as the world's leading central banks concentrate on tightening monetary policy, the fiscal math worsening also occurs when debt servicing costs are anticipated to rise. According to estimates, 60% of low-income economies worldwide are either in debt crisis or are in great danger of entering it, while middle-income nations are already facing the most significant debt service costs in 30 years. Their severe fiscal strain will constrain these nations' capacity to assist their citizens through transfers and subsidies. The cost of buying food on the international market, where most commodities are priced in dollars, may also increase for some people due to currency weakness. That might not bode well for the stability of society and the economy. A few isolated protests have already been documented around the world as a result of rising food and gasoline costs, as well as the pandemic's economic effects. If the battle lasts for a long time, 30 countries in North Africa and Asia that rely heavily on Russia and Ukraine for their essential food supplies may fare far worse. The USDA predicts that price increases for food bought for domestic use would be between 1.5 and 2.5% in 2019, falling from 2.5 to 3.5% in 2021. According to Wells Fargo's Swanson, the writing is already on the wall for a slowing and slight reversal of food prices in 2022. He said, "Of course, the weather always has the last say as to when that occurs, but future sales of major grains and oilseeds are expected to be lower overall for the coming year. Meat and animal goods have a history of being more erratic than other categories, but according to Swanson, meat has led to price hikes. It will probably lead to price softening and modest reversals. Restaurants and other places where you can eat outside the home are where prices might continue to be high." The chairman of Purdue University's Department of Agricultural Economics, Jason Lusk, noted that restaurant costs had increased more than usual. Although there are several causes, the scarcity of employees and rising wages are the main ones.